and there were very few Black people. So I have gotten used to, I don't necessarily notice it anymore, but you always notice it when you're the only in the room.
So talk to me a little bit about, I've had these conversations with VCs on how to navigate and find your way into a VC role. And some would say, you need to be a business student and find your way. Talk to me about how you think people's best path forward into finding a VC role looks today.
Sure, I can tell you my own path, and then I can tell you kind of the historical paths that I've seen. There's kind of two main ways. You come in from finance, either you had an investment banking or consulting background, and then you move over into that world of investing from the venture side, or you're an ex-operator and entrepreneur, and then you move over from that perspective having been an operator. So those are the two aspects. And I started my career in investment banking. I worked at Goldman Sachs, analyst program. So I did analyst and associate years at Goldman, but I didn't go into venture right out of after going into investment banking. I actually went to business school. A lot of people do that path of thinking about what's next. And so post business school, I went and worked for American Express. I did the traditional big corporate job. And then I actually went to a smaller private equity owned company. So I saw the difference between private equity, which is looking at later stage, much more established businesses, and venture capital, which is looking at the earlier stage. And I think for me, what kind of made the difference was that when you're going into private equity, these companies have been around for decades, maybe longer than that are being acquired and brought together. Venture is about the new and starting things at the beginning. And I think around the time when I made the decision that I wanted to leave traditional corporate America, I was reading all these articles that were saying things like, women don't want to be, CEOs. Women just want to create kind of lifestyle businesses, and they are not looking to be at the top. They don't want to run the same race. And I was like, those are not the women that I went to college with, worked at Goldman Sachs with, and just the women in my network. And I realized that I also saw a lot of women leaving traditional corporate and going out and either starting their own things. And that was the path I took. I literally left. I didn't know what I was going to do next. And I took 8 months off and I traveled. I was lucky that I had the kind of safety net to be able to do that. But it was during that course I went across Africa, Europe, the US. And I was talking to my female friends along the way. And we were having similar conversations about, we want our work to mean something. We want, if we're leaving family or kids or all these kind of things, we want it to be worth something. And that's kind of what led me to start my own advisory company. So I decided, okay, I know what I want to focus on. I want to focus on women entrepreneurs, women investors, kind of galvanizing the community. That's the contra of what I'm reading. And then I decided, okay, how am I going to do that? Do I want to join a startup, or do I want to, go do it on my own? And I realized that consulting and doing advisory work was the best way for me to get in, even though I did it in the back of my mind know that I wanted to do investing. But, I think I would argue that no woman ever has just been like, maybe had I been a guy leaving Goldman, I would have been like, I'm ready to launch that fund and I'll go launch the fund, and possibly could have done it. But it's very challenging back then and even now for a woman to just kind of stand up and raise a fund. And you're seeing, it's exciting that more and more women are raising venture capital funds, but you're seeing that they're smaller relative to their male peers. And the track record that they often have is much more extensive in having done it like by themselves before they started it. And so, I was like, let me do it the way I feel comfortable and the way that I think that I could bring the most value. So I used my network and I started working and taking on engagements for women founders that I knew were looking for help. And then, women investors. I was in investment banking. We got paid well. And I knew guys that started making private investments when we were analysts, associates. I knew none of my women friends, including some that are still there to this day, that had made a private investment. Now, that's strange. It's not, I'm sure there's pay gaps there too, but you're starting off with a population that does have disposable income that they can use.
Right.
Men are using it, women are not. Why is that? So I wanted to do something around that conversation of both women as entrepreneurs who wanted to start and lead big companies, and then women as investors who wanted to actually deploy capital for future gain. So that was the finance perspective. But like, you know, you asked the question about how do you get into venture capital? It is such a relationship-driven industry that you really have to be in the spaces where investors are to start building the relationships that will get you top of mind, so that when these job openings happen, it's not like investment banks, they do analyst classes. They hire in every year after college. You bring in 50, 100 into the firm at the same time. Most VCs are very small. They may have, you know, one or two. Some, like the Kleiners and Sequoias, have larger partner bases, but most of them are very small. And when the openings happen, they're filled by word of mouth. So you've got to get in the flow of where the word of mouth is happening so that you can be somebody that people think of when they want to say, oh, we're looking for a new investor. Do you know anybody, an analyst, associate that can come in and step in?
You mentioned when you were reading those articles and they were saying women don't want to do X, Y, and Z, and you're saying, well, not the people that I grew up with. Do you think it's those stories and narratives reinforce to women that there's not a place for them in these seats?
Yeah.
And therefore, those investment banker women don't invest because they don't see their stories being told?
Well, I mean, let's be clear. Like, it wasn't the people I grew up with. I mean, I'm the child of immigrants. I was actually born in Nigeria. We moved to the U.S. when I was 5, and I grew up in Southern Virginia, much more surrounded by, you know, academics. My father was a professor, and we lived around the military bases. So I didn't know any VCs growing up. That, like, the thought never even crossed my mind that venture capital existed. I knew finance because my father was a professor of finance, but I didn't even know really about Wall Street till I got to college. And that's where, you know, I went to Princeton for college, and there was recruiting. There was heavy recruiting that would come on campus. And that's where I thought finance from the perspective of the application of it in Wall Street. But, you know, if you've never thought about it before, if it's not something that now I regularly interact with VCs, never would have crossed my mind that me at 18 going to college, that I would be a venture capitalist today. No, it never even crossed my mind. But I had to be exposed to it, and I had to be exposed to, I was lucky to be exposed to the full spectrum of it. I started my career at the opposite end, where every VC hopes that their portfolio company gets to, getting taken public by a company like Goldman, working with multinational, multi-billion-dollar companies. I got to see that aspect. And then I've actually gone backwards to go back to the beginning of where these companies are starting. And I think what did that for me was that I realized I loved the energy that comes from that Wall Street world, but I love the relationships that comes from the venture world, because you're still at these early stages. These companies, these founders still want advice. They actually want to hear from their investors. They want to hear from their customers. Unlike, you know, when you're a large multinational, you get the quarterly earnings call.
Right.
Maybe they'll take Q&A, maybe they won't. And it's just kind of until there's an activist investor that steps in that you really kind of hear anything. But in venture, you're in the trenches with them. They want you in the trenches with them, which I really love.
So I guess we made an assumption that women do want to. Why should women consider venture investing, I guess, not even just venture, but investing as a mode of something they should be involved in?
Yes. So, you know, building a diversified portfolio of assets and asset classes is important for anybody that's trying to build wealth, and building, you know, not just wealth to live on, but like generational wealth.
Yeah.
And when you look at where a lot of these new millionaires, billionaires are coming out of, yes, there are ones that are doing, you know, the hedge funds and trading in the public markets, but there are a lot more that have either built a company. Look at Mark Zuckerberg. He started Facebook in college, has stayed with it throughout, and it's turned it into a multi-billion-dollar entity that is going to transcend his lifetime, his children's lifetime. Investors that went in at like $50,000 into Facebook were returned, I think, several hundred million.
Yeah.
So that kind of return, you don't necessarily get in the public markets the way you'll see when you start something from zero and watch it exit and stay through to the other side. So when we think about generational wealth, closing income inequality, but it's hard because not everybody has the disposable income
Correct.
to be able to do this. And so I would also stress that, investing is incredibly risky. Most startups fail. Most investments will not succeed. They will either go directly to zero or maybe return you the money that you put in if you're lucky. But most, especially in the venture space, because it's so about high growth and building companies that you think will be the next multi-billion-dollar kind of unicorns, that is a high risk, high reward proposition. So if you're thinking about being an investor, there's two paths. Either you go as an individual and start investing your own personal capital, or you go into more of an institutional and join as an employee, associate, partner level to invest on behalf of other people's money.
Yeah.
And getting to those opportunities is really, it's hard. And it's really about, they won't find you. You have to go find them.
Yeah, I'm really interested in your take on the opportunities Black women and Black men, just Black people in general, have with regards to starting companies, because so often we get pigeonholed into, well, you got to start these types of companies because that's how we think of you, these stereotypical types of things. And not to say that there's anything bad with starting a company that is stereotypically
mom and pop
right.
kind of thing. Yeah.
So, but how do you think about the opportunities that might be available that we may not consider at large, that we can play those fields?
Well, I mean, the investing game and private markets and capitalism is about meeting the needs of unserved or untapped populations. So, I think that Black men, women, people in general, we have been underserved in a lot of different market opportunities. And we are also poised to be the people that can have solutions to those market inefficiencies. What becomes challenging is when the people on the other side of the table have never experienced those. It's hard to invest in something that you've literally never experienced or can't wrap your mind around. Or, oftentimes there's the story of, a VC will be like, I'll ask my wife if it's a woman sitting in front of him. Yeah. And if the wife, I think Jen Hyman and Jenny Fleiss talk about it from Rent the Runway. At the beginning, they talk to investors and like, my wife would never rent a dress, but she's not the target demographic, right? But, it's realizing that sometimes just because it's not the target for you doesn't mean that it's not a huge population of people where it is a real problem. So, I think there's absolutely so many problems and solutions that Black founders can do. The next problem becomes being funded to be able to do it, especially if your vision is not to do a mom and pop where you can maybe try to do bank loans or do, small capital. Friends and family is a big thing. Friends and family around is a big thing of what launches, early entrepreneurs.
And we don't always have that.
And if you look around at friends and family, I grew up in a middle class family of professors, but my parents were not ready to
Nobody was writing $5,000 checks.
I didn't have the luxury of a president where you got $1 million startup to go do it. But it's when you don't have the friends and family, then it becomes daunting to think about how you even break through. And so when you do break through, it's about the access. Catherine Finney and Digital Undivided, they've done Project Diane looking specifically at Black and brown women. And what is it, 0.006% is going to Black women. And I mean, that, I think the first report was like, the real unicorns are Black women because it's just so difficult. And somebody was like, it's statistically insignificant, but one of the portfolio companies somebody said that to, one of our portfolio companies, and she's like, but I'm a person, I am significant. Right. I'm there because, with every single one that happens, it's bucking that number up and up. But when you're absolute and there's so few getting in there, and there's so much other capital out there, it can feel overwhelming. So I think what's happening is more of the founders that are getting through to the other side are reaching back to others to share how they did it. There's organizations like for women looking at All Raise is doing some great work trying to get women entrepreneurs and women investors, more women seated in positions of partner level roles where you're the check writer. We are going to attack it on multiple fronts. At Gingerbread Capital, we've taken the approach of attacking it at multiple fronts, specifically looking at women entrepreneurs. So we do direct investments in women entrepreneurs. And then we believe that it's also important to get capital in the hands of women investors. And so we're limited partners, we're LPs in funds that are backed by majority women GPs. So for us, we think that if we get it at both sides, hopefully that needle will move, right, because the funding is being diversified on both ends.
Who is best positioned then to take these seats that you talk about in the firms? Because when you think about, I'm a black male or female founder, and I'm going to AfroTech, and I see, oh, there's Ita walking down the hall. You probably have 200 people following you because you are the one who know you look like them, and you can get what they're trying to build. And when there's so few Itas and Richard Kirby's and Maisha Leaks and et cetera, all the attention goes to a handful of VCs who can only write so many checks, who can only engage with so many entrepreneurs. So who out there, black women, black men, should be considering or should be at least taking a second look at venture roles or investing in startups that may not be today?
Yeah. Well, I think if becoming an investor is something that it's important to you, you have to start now to build a personal brand in the space and to have a point of view. And so that doesn't mean necessarily writing checks, but there are, especially in New York, which I love being a VC in New York. I now get to go to both coasts a lot more. I appreciate so much the New York market because we physically sit on top of each other. Yeah. Like we are across 8 miles. We can get from, we can start out in Brooklyn and have a meeting in Manhattan and go up to Harlem all in the same night, all in the same day. That really isn't happening on the West Coast. And I go and see it. If you're in SF, or you're out on the peninsula, people are like, oh, that thing is out there. Oh, no. Right. And in LA, it's the same thing. It's very neighborhood specific. And I think our just general size of us and the infrastructure that we can use subways and move through relatively easy has made the New York market more advantageous. And I would say it's a great market for women, and it's a great market for people of color also because there's more than one industry exists in New York. More than one type of people lives in New York, and we've seen there's finance, there's fashion, there's retail, there's lots of different things converge in this market, and there's great gender dynamics and diversity in this city by the nature of, again, we're all being on top of each other, which means that the likelihood of seeing more people that look different is increased in a population where it's so concentrated and where people live and work. So, from the perspective of breaking in New York, there's so many like meetup groups and there's so many different organizations that are located not that far away from each other. And what do we call it in New York? Silicon Alley?
Yes, right.
Yeah, like you can just walk down 20 blocks and they're all based in like a 20 block radius. So I would say the great thing is a lot of VCs talk on either like Instagram or Twitter. Follow the ones in the New York market. If you're a New York-based investor, follow them and they'll talk about where they're speaking at. They do a lot of speaking engagements. Go to see where they're speaking at. Go to the things that their pitch competition judges at. That's where you start seeing and meeting other people that are in that ecosystem, and you must build relationships. That is key no matter what. You have to put yourself out there, maybe uncomfortable, but you have to put yourself out there to start, forming those connections.
So let's take me back to 17 to 22-year-old Ita.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the pre-med, the doctor that is not in front of you today? Yes.
But let's say you were intentionally trying to be what you are today. And for those girls out there who do want to do what you do and are earlier in their career, what would you have done intentionally to get to where you are today?
One of the things that I even noticed looking at my college that's different now, there are a lot more resources happening on campuses of talking about entrepreneurship and talking about different paths that are not, traditionally it was like, you go to banking, you go to a major corporate, you go to consulting, where the paths out of, my undergrad was kind of it. But now people are starting to do classes in entrepreneurship. There are clubs around it. There are pitch competitions that are happening at the undergraduate level. So first of all, I would say look within your student body. When you get to college, if this is something on your mind, like, there's clubs, there's people. I think about my business school class. Warby Parker guys came out of my business school class. They didn't know each other coming in, but they spent those 2 years, they built those relationships, they brought what each of their skill set is, and they launched it spring semester of second year. And, we're 10 years, we're about to have our 10-year anniversary. take full advantage. College, business school are those like years where you step aside and you get to be, you get to be really thinking about yourself because you're in that school bubble, especially full-time programs. So that's when I would say really, really use the advantage of getting to know the other students in your class and finding out. I personally love taking, and I wish I'd taken more of these before. There's all these kind of strengths tests.
Yeah,
There's I love the Clifton Strengths.
Okay. It's like the Myers-Briggs. I didn't take that.
I think I'm ENTJ or P.
Oh, I'm INTP.
There you go. And I love taking those things.
Right.
I still take them all the time. And then, so find out, I like to build towards my strengths. Find out where you think you're really strong, and then find the people that build out around that, because that's where the best teams are. You've got somebody that's bringing a different thing to the table, and then you can move that forward. And then internships. In college is also a great time to be able to get paid, unpaid internships. Sometimes you can get things for credit. Use college, business school as that time to take the risk and take the jump out on the leap and go intern for a company, or even maybe try something, entrepreneurial over a summer. You if you can. But I also recognize that you need money to live,
Right,
and you
right.
need, like, college isn't just, unless you're lucky you get a
Right.
full ride. You have to do all those things. But where there's the ability to align what you do and what get paid for it if possible, to help you build just the building blocks. It doesn't have to be you have that killer idea overnight. Giving yourself experiences where you test, am I a strength at finance? Am I more of a strength in computer science, which is now becoming one of the most popular degrees? I think if I went back, I was a psych major with a certificate in finance. I might have been a computer science major with a certificate in finance.
Yeah.
I actually love, and my psychology degree comes in very handy because all
You
venture
understand people.
is relationships.
Yeah.
Relationships of how to get the most out of your founders, relationships of how to form the connections that get access and get you the foot in the room to get the one that they'll take your check versus somebody else. So maybe I would have been a triple major, maybe a double major and a minor. But I do think that having that kind of background was good.
So what is your typical experience like being a Black woman in venture capital when you find yourself in rooms that you're the only Black person, period?
Yeah.
Right? And talk to me about what it's like just day in and day out living this life.
Well, I think it started from, my first job, right? I went into Wall Street. I went into, financing in a trading floor setting where there were very few women. We had 5 women traders on a floor of, lots more than that. And there were very few Black people. So I have gotten used to, I don't necessarily notice it anymore, but you always notice it when you're the only in the room. But I choose to see that as an advantage. I have a very, my full name is very gender neutral. So people sometimes, if they haven't looked me up in advance, they don't know who's going to walk through the door. I've gotten, are you Greek? Are you Japanese? And then I show up. I'm like, hi. But use that as a thing. People don't forget you when you're the only one. So don't feel, I've stopped feeling bad about it. I choose to see it that people always remember me. They might not be able to remember my name, but they'll be like, that there was this woman, usually like, but you stand out. So use that to your advantage, because that's when there's a lot of, people that are the hoodie wearing white man or all those kind of things. A lot less people that look like us in a room. So use that to your advantage. And then when you get that opportunity, make it count. Make it count by being prepared in terms of understanding who's in the room. Be prepared to target your message to who's in the room. The same pitch as a founder isn't going to work for everyone. If you're a woman and you know that you're pitching something that's a female product, do what, like Jen and Jenny did to get through to the male investors and ask that same wife how many events she goes to and how many outfits she's bought, and quantify it. You've seen the credit card receipts, and turn it into a way that resonates for that person. And then you will see, you can then bring them over to the other side. You're not going to drive a winning argument by just only using your point of view. It has to resonate for the person on the other side who is in the position of power, if it's their money that you want. So use that, use the fact that you're unique, use the fact that you understand who's in that room and how they think, and then quickly follow up. If they ask you to follow up and say, hey, I would love, to take a call, send me some materials, Don't spend a week and a half making the perfect set of materials. Put together 15 slides or less and send it over quickly so that you keep that momentum going, because they're going to be inundated and they want to have you fresh in their mind. So quick follow-up, short follow-up, and answering the questions that were asked, and then turning it into making it really feel like it's about building that relationship with that person over a long term. You're not going to get funded in one conversation. Getting capital in venture space takes time, and it takes relationship building. So don't think it's like it's going to happen in a week. It might happen, but chances are it's months that you're looking at.